First, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Lexi Kirkconnell-Kawana, and I am the Chief Executive of Impress, the Royal Charter recognised self-regulatory body for news publisher organisations in the UK. It's great to have everyone here this afternoon on World Ethics Day, an auspicious day in the calendar, for a really vital conversation that we think is urgent and necessary: rebuilding trust, improving information ecosystems. And whether you're joining us now from a newsroom or a classroom or a government department or an NGO, or maybe you're from a tech platform, we really want to thank you for taking your time out of busy afternoons to spend some time to be here. We want to let everyone know that the session is being recorded, and we will give you access to the session today after the event. And you're most welcome to enter questions via our Q&A for speakers to respond to. We said at the top of the hour, if you would like to, you're also welcome to put your name, your organisation in the chat so that you can connect across the hour with other stakeholders here. So why are we having this conversation today? We are living through a pretty profound moment. Don't know if anyone else has noticed. It is a time of lots of disruption and change. The trust we had in institutions like traditional media, legacy media, has hit some pretty historic lows and has stayed there. In the UK, the media has languished at the bottom of the Alderman barometer for a number of years now. And when we connect the dots and we ask how audiences think about news and information, how they think about the media, our research with the University of Leeds and the University of Derby has shown that people just don't know what goes into news. In fact, over half of people don't understand how news is made, and similar amounts, around 50% of the public, don't know what standards go into how information is regulated. And that's one of the issues around why they don't trust it. And we all know the adage that misinformation spreads faster than the truth. A statistic a lot of people often quote is that it spreads 6 times faster, but some computational analyses has put these at 10 or even 20 times faster. And we all know the challenge of undoing misinformation once it takes root in public discourse. And what are the consequences of this? Well, if you've been following politics in the UK, we've had significant unrest and political upheaval, from the riots in Southport to recent marches up to Westminster. We've seen hotels housing asylum seekers being attacked, businesses being shuttered, and councils facing really hefty repair costs, sometimes into the millions. And all of this unrest is not leaving behind just sort of broken windows. It's affecting, people, families, and communities on the ground. I recall one relative of Elsie Stancombe, who was one of the poor girls murdered during before the Southport riot took place, saying that they wanted space to mourn that loss, but instead saw their child's death being used as fuel for hate. So apart from all of this information disorder causing increasing social division and polarization, independent research has estimated it's costing our global economy in the realm of £78 billion to clean up after misinformation and disinformation. And across sectors, from crisis, PR, communications, advertising, to regulatory bodies like us, we're all facing the challenge of getting verified, consensus-building information in front of people. But we're often doing it in isolation, without joined-up solutions, which is why today's gathering matters for us. We hope today is going to be about connection, about collaboration, and courage to change how we do things. And again, in the spirit of collaboration, we're asking, if you would like to, please introduce yourself in the chat with your name and organisation and what you're looking to collaborate on right now, so that we can share and learn. This webinar for us today has some key objectives. For us, it's firstly to provoke and challenge, inspire with some real life stories from people across different industries impacted by information disruption. We are also going to hear some stories about how professionals are grappling with trust crises on a day-to-day basis. Secondly, we want to open up a meaningful discussion on how we can improve our information ecosystem. And thirdly, we want to spotlight some joined up, interconnected solutions, because while all of these things are very complex, we want to support a path forward for effective interventions that work and practical ways of making our hopes a reality here. Which is why I'm very excited to announce something that we're very proud to launch today at Impress, the Creating Ethical Media and Journalism Accreditation Program. This is a first-of-a-kind initiative for us. It's an evidence-based, collaboratively built way of equipping professionals across the media space with skills to navigate this disruption. And our solution really focuses on people as agents for change and making sure that they are resourced with everything they need to tackle some of those information frontiers like artificial intelligence in the media, social media, building audience trust, and engaging with communities. This rebuilding trust exercise we know is one that isn't done in isolation. It's a shared responsibility. And I see all of you who have joined us today, whether you're a speaker or an attendee, as future trust builders. And so I'm really delighted to pass the mic now to some incredible trust builders in the space who come from a range of different backgrounds and disciplines to share their expertise. And what I hope we can do is over the next 40 minutes, imagine a healthier, more ethical information ecosystem centering people and communities. So without further ado, I'm going to stop now and hand over to Gia Tom, our Development Director here at Impress, to introduce our speakers. Thank you, Gia.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today, and thank you, Lexi. My name is Gia Tom. I'm the Director of Development here at Impress. I started my career in tech. Now I'm in regulation, and these days I spend almost more time binging legislation and media reports than Netflix. So besides that making me a very big nerd, it also makes me very excited to host this panel today, particularly because it's at the intersection of all three of those things. As Lexi mentioned, we're really at quite a bizarre time in human history. You know, on the one hand, we have never had more ways to connect, and yet we have never been more disconnected. Many people are talking about an information war being fought. Personally, I don't love a kind of a war metaphor, but at the same time, I think we need strength and resilience to face what's out there. And I'm particularly excited about this session today because all the speakers who are joining me, I really consider to be warriors, full of strength and resilience in this information space and working to make things much more trustworthy and safe. So I'm going to introduce them one by one. And before we get into our questions for real, I'm also going to ask them to each share with us what they feel some of their media superpowers are and how they have used those in the past, or maybe some collaborations from the speakers as well. So let's start with Adeline. Welcome, Adeline. Adeline Hulin leads UNESCO's Media and Information Literacy and Digital Competencies Unit. The Adeline that I know always has a million projects on the go. She's amazing. She's very much a doer. She's spearheaded global initiatives like Social Media for Peace. She's implemented citywide rollouts of media literacy programs across places like Bosnia and Herzegovina, Colombia, Indonesia, and Kenya. And if you haven't yet read their landmark study behind the screens about influences in the news, I highly suggest you do. Welcome, Adeline.
Hi, Gia. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for this super nice introduction, Gia. It goes to my heart. And also, thanks a lot for the invitation to join this exciting session. And congrats for the launch of your new program. I think it's it's a great program that you're doing right now. So congrats.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And thank you for that. So tell us, what is your media superpower?
So if I would name a media superpower, I would say that, and it's really related to the job I'm having right now, that I'm heading the Media Information Literacy Unit at UNESCO. I would say it's my capacity to bring people that usually never sit together or rarely sit together around the same table. So it's been like, for instance, the capacity to bring around the same table content creators, journalists, policymakers, youth, educators, like all these kind of stakeholders, because at UNESCO, our core message is that empowering users with media information literacy is really a multi-stakeholder endeavor, and it's a shared responsibility. And you mentioned before the project Social Media for Peace. It's a very good example of that. We've been working in conflict-prone environments, and there we were building coalitions. Our idea was simple. We see that a lot of organizations, for instance, religious groups, youth organizations, different kinds of CSOs, they all engage separately with platforms monitoring harmful content online. But it's very hard to engage separately. So we were just creating some coalitions in order for them to get stronger together, in order to engage together with platforms, in order to find some solution in relation to the moderation, curation of harmful content online. So I would just say, I guess this would be the media superpower I would mention here.
Wonderful, thank you, and very much needed. I mean, this is part of the reason why it's our kind of theme today. Is I feel like in silos we're not going to be able to find solutions. So thank you, Adeline. Very welcome. Now I'm going to go to Ali-Abbas Ali. Ali-Abbas is the Director of Broadcasting Competition at Ofcom, where he turns research into practical policy. Ali-Abbas is the only one of our panelists who I've never actually met in person. I've had the privilege of hearing him speak many, many times. When I asked the team about Ali-Abbas, they told me, first of all, that he's a lovely guy, which is always a nice thing, but also that he's incredibly good at systems thinking and understanding political levers and incentives. That is really wonderful. We know as well that Ali-Abbas has led work across telecoms, post and media, and also Ofcom's review of public service media and the very influential study Who Controls the News We See Online, which has been highly influential in shaping the UK's response to digital advertising concentration. Welcome, Ali-Abbas.
Gia, thank you so much. And it is a shortcoming of not meeting you in person that we will have to rectify in the near future. Thank you very much for that introduction.
Welcome. Tell us, what's your media superpower?
I would say mine is one that hopefully we can all share, which is anytime that you find a problem is proving intractable or difficult to solve. This is particularly as regulator, but I hope it applies to journalists, to editors, to other people involved in the sector. Go back to asking yourself, how do I best serve the audience? And any question that you have found that's difficult to solve, in my experience as a regulator, that unlocks the question. You can get yourself mired in detail and technicalities and so on. So anything that looks difficult, take a step back. How do I best serve the audience? And you'll probably find that a good ethical answer in the spirit of today presents itself.
Love that. Love that. Thank you and welcome. Now to welcome Jason Cumming, who is the Director of News Standards at NBC News. He oversees editorial standards, verification, and corrections worldwide. He's built newsroom frameworks across the NBC and led verification during major live events, as well as being a multi-Emmy nominee, which I must say he's never once mentioned to me. I had to find that out in my own research. And he's also won a Society of Professional Journalists Award for breaking news coverage of the Brussels terror attacks. Welcome, Jason. And if I can add as well, the one thing that I have experienced about Jason is that he is an incredibly thoughtful and kind person. He's kind of always got ethics front of mind, and he's always very willing to help people and support them also in getting to a more ethical state, so which is wonderful. Welcome, Jason.
Wow, what an introduction. You're giving away all my secrets as well, though. Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. What is your superpower?
Look, I'm going to give you a little bit of background, I guess, about sort of like what I do, which maybe will help explain what my superpower is. So, like, you know, I work at NBC News, which is an American broadcast network. My team, sort of, the standards team, gets involved in scripts and stories that are like sensitive, tricky, potentially problematic, and we try and make sure that they're buttoned up and bulletproof. You know, we also deal with anonymous sources. We're basically the people that, you know, we need to have a comfort level with something before we go with it. We've been described as like the conscience of the newsroom, which is something like that I quite like. But we're kind of like this safety net that exists both for journalists, you know, our journalists, as well as trying to protect the reputation of the company. And, you know, the things we really focus on, like the pillars, are, you know, fairness, transparency, and accuracy, and, you know, ultimately getting things right. So when it comes to your question, I'm going to be very geeky and literal, and I'm going to say my superpower is actually like a super shield, or like a force field that allows me to be thrown under the bus without ever getting a scratch on me. So you know, it's such a tricky time to be operating as a journalist in the US. Obviously, you know, you have an administration that's distorting reality in real time and discrediting the work of journalists. And so, you know, our people are really under a lot of pressure and a lot of scrutiny, you know, where, you know, often it's, we don't like your coverage is essentially turned into it's fake news or personal attacks. And that's even when we know that reporting is accurate, you know, rock solid. So I always argue that, look, we should be loud and proud and unapologetic about being ethical, you know, and operating ethically and fairly. And we should really make a virtue of that. But, you know, there are times where, you know, I mean, I'm constantly telling our people, like, look, if it comes down to it, you need to throw me under the bus as a, you know, if it makes your life easier to blame the people in standards for forcing me to do this, that's absolutely all right. You know, I can take it here. It's, you know, it's just such unprecedented times, I think, really, where, you know, you have, I guess there's a school of thought where, you know, one school of thought where people say, look, when the president of the United States says something is news, we have to cover it, right? But I always sort of come back to the, there's this old adage that is like, you know, if someone tells you it's raining and another person tells you it's dry, you don't quote them both. That's not your job as a journalist. You know, you go outside and find out what's happening. So, you know, we shouldn't really be parroting, you know, whatever. If we know something's not accurate, we really need to be, we can't just parrot it, no matter who it is, you know. If we're doing that, what's the point of us even existing as a press? You know, what are we providing our audience by doing that? But yeah, I mean, to be the person on air saying that, you know, contradicting the president or fact checking the president is not easy. So that's where I step in and say, look, blame me. It's those horrible people in standards forcing me to, like, you know, take a specific approach, or, you know, fact check or caveat or coming up with language. I can be your shield. So there you are.
Love that. Shields are very needed as well in this time. And yeah, thank you for sharing. It's a particularly interesting place that you're in, as you said, as a US news organization. So thank you for sharing. Okay, one more. Welcome, Shalina. So Shalina Jan Mohammed is a prolific author and podcaster. She's also the director of consumer equality at Ogilvy. And she has been the lead author of the Consumer Equality Equation, a major study on ethnicity and consumer experience. She's also an award-winning strategist and author, and her books include Love in a Headscarf and The Story of Now, a book about the British Empire for kids, which, again, if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. Both of my godsons loved it. Welcome, Shelina. Oh, and if I can add as well, Shelina also serves on the board of Impress as a non-executive director. So I am very lucky to be able to ask her questions even outside of this panel. And she's always got an interesting, provocative answer for us. Welcome, Shelina.
Hey, hi, Gia. Hi, everyone.
Welcome. What about you, Shelina? What's some of your media superpowers?
I mean, right now, my superpower is drinking caffeine to keep going. I kind of like Jason's one about being able to be thrown onto the bus and emerge unscathed like a superhero, but he's already taken that one. I think it would be something along the lines of cultural imagination or storytelling imagination. And I think of that really as the idea that, to see how stories in their biggest sense shape our societies, but also to have the optimism and the imagination to see how they could positively shape our societies. And that's been a really driving force for me, because I came to news as a young Muslim woman, seeing the coverage of Muslims, and just picked up a pen and started writing and became an op-ed columnist. So I've kind of come from the coalface. And then seeing the power of those stories and how, when they're distorted, they can really shape our society in a negative way, which is what we're talking about here in terms of trust and validity and integrity in stories. So then I started writing newspaper columns, started writing books, and now work in the advertising industry, which again has a very kind of part of that storytelling ecosystem. So I remain firmly one of the optimists in this conversation, but I think a lot about the choices that stories make and the role they play in shaping who we are.
Wonderful. Thanks, Shelina. And again, very, very necessary in our time, and very apt for this conversation where we are looking for solutions. Okay, so everyone who has joined the call, please feel free to also add your questions in the chat, and we will put them to the panel. But in the meantime, let's get into it. So my first question is for Adeline. So it really feels like we're seeing this huge increase in authoritarian and populist communications. There's lots of divisive and discriminatory content out there. How do we navigate this polarized media space, and how can we look to course correct?
And this is a hard question, Gia. It's as you say, like here you need a magic superpower, I think, to solve the issue at the moment. But I like what Shelina was saying, to remain positive. But to answer your question, I don't think it's just a feeling. It's actually a documented reality. We know right now that divisive and discriminatory content are incentivized through algorithm, and they are reshaping the way we relate to each other. They are eroding trust, and including the trust in the media. So the consequences are very tangible. And now the point is also, I just want to highlight the recent speech of Maria Ressa at the General Assembly 2 weeks ago. I don't know if some of you had the chance to listen to her. And she was really mentioning that it's becoming that information integrity is becoming the mother of all battles. And if we are losing this battle, we risk losing everything. And she speaks, of course, about peace, democracy, many of the things we're talking here. So what do we do? How do we navigate this? At least I think there is no magic solution, but I can refer to the work we do at UNESCO when it comes to information integrity, and I mean ultimately the question of restoring trust in information. We have a strategy based on 3 pillars. These 3 pillars is one is the absolutely need to support independent media. We know how much they've been suffering economically. They need to have the resources, but also the protection. to uphold ethical and editorial standards and provide people with verified information. Then we work on the second pillar, which is about the transmission of information. And here that's where we have an initiative, global initiative called Internet for Trust. And it's about the governance of digital platform and working on ensuring transparency, accountability, human rights-based approach in the way platforms are functioning. We have some global guidelines and we're working globally with regulators. We have a global network of regulators working on the implementation of these guidelines. It's called the Global Forum GFN, the Global Forum Networks. And then the last pillar, which is more related to my work, is about empowering audiences. And it's the work we do through media and information literacy, working with the right holders, helping users to discern, engage critically with content. But here, one of my battles, maybe that's the last thing I'm going to say, is that I believe we can do really quite a lot in building capacity of users through capacity building training. That's one thing, but that's not enough. At this stage, with the fast pace and the changes of technology, what we see with generative AI, etc., we need as well for media information literacy to be embedded in the governance of digital platform and make sure that user empowerment is also being done through technology and through different tools than just capacity building of users. We cannot put all the burden on users alone. So that would be my message.
Love that, Adeline. Thank you. I think you're absolutely right. For me, it often it feels like when people put the burden for climate change on the individual, you know, and unless you are completely carbon neutral in your own life, then nothing's going to change. But of course, we need to look at the systemic issues as well. And I think it's the same in the media. You touched on something there that I'd like to pick up as well. You were speaking about platforms and being able to have governance around there and more trust in the platforms and infrastructure that we're using. I wanted to go to Ali-Abbas, and you know, we're really the current business model for the platforms that we're also reliant on is really the attention economy. Right. So how do we think about changing incentives or levers to improve that so that we can incentivize more ethical content?
It's a great question, Gia. I think I'd just momentarily take a step back and say, as humans, as an audience, we are hardwired to find a lot of that sensationalist content attractive, and it's more interesting, and it's easier to consume than something which makes you stop and think and work really hard to analyze and accept new information. So against a piece of fabulously written, hard-hitting journalistic content, or something which is highly populist, plays to your affirmation biases and so on, which way would you lean? Just as a human being, you would probably lean towards the latter. So we first of all just need to accept that this is an element of human nature that we are battling against. And the platforms have found a really effective way to either service that or exploit it. You can choose the verb that you want to apply here. I think the first thing I would say, and I'd go back to essentially where Adeline is, something has got to happen with the audience. If you don't help the audience become more resilient to this kind of content, you are always fighting a losing battle against what's in their inherent nature, or what's in our inherent nature. Sorry, I don't externalize this. And absolutely, yeah, there is a role for the platforms here. There's a role for educators. There is a role for regulators. This is a cross-society effort that we need in order to help ourselves as the audience understand what is happening to us and how these platforms are playing to our proclivities. I think the remainder of this then is much more on the supply side of the question. You have to have a thriving, sustainable journalism or high-quality media sector that can provide an alternative. In the UK, the Digital Markets Act will take us some way towards that, but it's not the entirety of the solution. And I think there is almost an inevitability of some form of government support or intervention that is required for the sector. And the reason why I say that is Digital Markets Act will get you to a fair market. But what we know about high quality content, the kind of content that many people on this call will be producing, is that it has a very large positive externality, or what you might call a public good. The value to society of people consuming it is greater than the value to the individual. And markets are very poor at properly pricing that. And you usually need the government then to step in and say, no, there is more value here than the individual is willing to pay for, and I will find some way of addressing the difference. And then once that supply is available, you've got to make it easy to surface in front of the audience. If it's buried behind a tsunami of nonsense and misinformation, then people will never get to it. So there has to be something that you can intervene in, some legislative hook for the platforms that makes them bring this stuff to the surface, because it is in the long-term interests of their customers, as opposed to the short-term interests of their profits.
Ooh, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Okay, I'm gonna take some questions from the audience. We have a question from Laura Dawson, which I'm going to direct to Jason. So she says, how can we get a more mature approach to fairness and balance? We see this is sometimes giving equal time and airtime to the conspiracy and populist voices as to the experts. And she says, for me, this degrades trust and leaves me feeling that we are scared of the populists.
Yeah.
How would you respond?
Yeah, it's a constant thing, in the US as well. And I guess what I would say is, like, that's what we're paid to do as journalists. Like, it sort of comes back to we always, as a network, we try to reflect all sides. But if it's we do try and be, fairness is at the heart of what we try and do. But at the same time, we all have to sort of take a step back. And if we have gone to an organization or sought comment, which we would seek comment on any story for anyone that's involved, particularly if they've been portrayed negatively, or to give them fair chance to give their side of the story. And they come back with a response that does not answer the question we asked, or just your standard non-response response. The way we've been recently trying to address this is going with well, we went to them and asked X, Y, Z, and they came back and said this is what they said, right? They didn't address the points that we raised, and the allegations that were raised, and that sort of thing. I mean, the issue of sort of people who are sort of more bad actors, it's tricky, but I don't think we should be under any of course we should reach out to them and ask and
right to reply, right?
Exactly, give the right to reply. But if they come back with something that's demeaning, or a personal attack, in some cases our responses from some agencies or companies have just been attacks on our journalists without any response. Well, we're under no obligation to print that. We're under, we can say we reached out, and you can characterize what they said if you want, or we reached out and they declined to answer our questions. And that's sort of been where we are at the moment. But yeah, it's
tricky.
We're all grappling with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Shalina, I would love to, following on from what Jason was saying, we also seeing a lot of kind of attacks on vulnerable communities, and often reporting that is not kind of helpful to the situation. I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts about how can we improve that engaging with various communities and being more sensitive and trying to make things more constructive and connected?
I mean, that's a great question. And they often say, isn't it, that how you treat your most unequal or your most vulnerable tells you about the bigger picture. And I think it really puts into focus some of the big questions that we've been talking about. I mean, minorities, vulnerable groups, whether those are ethnicity, whether that's religion, whether that's socioeconomic, whether that's disability, whether that's mental health, there's a whole range of groups that don't get the representation that they should and the sensitivity that they require from the bigger storytelling and the bigger news space. I mean, in particular, if we think recently in the UK about, and actually other countries in the world, about minority ethnic groups or about Muslim groups, I mean, one of the key discussions, which shouldn't even be a discussion, is, you know, should you reveal things ahead of the authorities and the police that, you know, might indicate a particular ethnicity. And, you know, the only argument really for being made for that is that it will stop speculation. But actually, if anything, it fuels speculation. So I think the issue there really is to take a very firm line. Obviously, it will take a number of attempts, might take months, might take years, but eventually, I think the readership will become accustomed to following the police line, which is not to speculate and to create further harm, as we saw certainly in the UK after the Southport riots. So I think that not feeding into speculation is really important. I'm going to say something that might be a bit controversial, but I say this as a UK leading author on ethnicity. It's all right to say the word white. You know, we say black, we say South Asian, we say Muslim. I think if we're going to be descriptive at the stage that it's appropriate to reveal that, that's absolutely fine. But I want to take a kind of a bigger approach to this, because one of the challenges for minority and other vulnerable groups is almost like where that story sits in the bigger landscape. So the role of editorial, the role of curation, the role of the cumulative effect becomes really, really important at that point. And I can see someone in the chat has put something about headlines. So thanks for stealing my thunder, because I had that as an example. But I was thinking about recently in the UK, they just appointed a female Archbishop of Canterbury. And there was a lot of discussion about a headline which said woman appointed as Archbishop of Canterbury. And you had to kind of go right into the depths of the article before you realised she actually had her own name, and that she was actually preceded by her husband's name and the fact that she had children. And that, I think, is really a great example of, I think it's very much easier for people to relate to the disparity in how men and women are portrayed. You know, we know women are portrayed much more as victims. You know, when they're murdered, we have these lovely pictures of them, which is horrific, but we don't actually get the kind of proactive side of it. And I think if we use that as a template for understanding the way that minorities are then presented, you know, often curated to have those negative stories, and all the other ones where they may be victims or they may have suffered harms are edited out. So that editorial and curation process is really, really important. And I think for anyone who's describing those stories and selecting them, being really aware of the tropes that may be perpetuated in those selections of both the story, the headline, and the content. And really, I know it's really tempting to get clickbait, but I'm just going to finalize on this. You know, even the Pope this week said that clickbait is a social harm. So, you know, when the Pope says it, we should not be doing
it. Love that. Thank you, Shalina. Yeah, I mean, some really good points there. Interesting to me what you were saying about editorial. And actually, I mean, that's perhaps not a simple thing to do, but that's a simple thing to add into your process, right? To be thinking about whenever you publish. So thank you for that. Sadly, we are running out of time, so I'm going to live up to the trope of an entitled white person and decide that we have to end it right now. And we're going to go for one last question to everybody on the panel. Just a quick one. If you could wave your magic wand and magic one solution that will build trust into being, what would that be? Adeline, let's start with you.
Well, for me, having media information literacy, I would make simply media information literacy compulsory. in all school curricula. We're about to celebrate the Global Media Information Literacy Week, actually at the end of the month. And we are going to release a brand new report about the global state of play of media information literacy. And in this report, what we're showing, we've been surveying for like 6 months what is happening throughout the world. And the results show that on the one side, all member states, countries are recognizing the importance of media information literacy. We now have 88% of member states that have a policy recognizing the importance of media information literacy. But this doesn't translate in practice in integration of MIL into curricula yet. And we keep hearing for that media information literacy, if we want to rebuild trust, but not only that, but also work on information integrity, it has to be taught like mathematics. And in fact, when it comes to the statistics, we have a large majority of countries that have not yet media information literacy in their curricula. And when it is integrated media information literacy, usually it's understood as digital skills, so the hardcore, and missing the critical thinking part. So that's really where, if I had a magic wand, we would make this change and we would make it compulsory for everyone.
Love it. Media literacy for everyone. Thanks, Adeline. Ali-Abbas?
I'm very much on the same theme as Adeline, but because you've given me a magic wand, Gia, I will play to the old adage. The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is today. So I would go back 20 years and instill digital literacy back then. And if we can't have it back then absolutely we need to invest now. Where I would go further is, I think there's a real temptation to look at that as being a children's education issue. And it's not, it's society-wide. I get more fake information memes from my uncle who's in his 70s than I do from my kids who are actually quite savvy and clued up about how the world works. So this is a cross-generational, cross-societal issue.
Absolutely. Thank you. Jason?
Hi. You stole my thunder, Ali-Abbas. Look, I'm a bit of a poacher turned gamekeeper because, you know, now I work in standards and ethics, but I started out as a tabloid reporter in Canada. And when I moved over here 25 years ago, I was working for a news agency that had very close relationships with a lot of the Fleet Street papers. And, you know, I discovered very quickly that the Canadian tabloid culture was very tame compared to what was going on here. You know, I was literally appalled by the stuff I was seeing, you know, the quid pro quos, the, you know, distortion of reality to fit narratives, you know, and agendas. And, you know, it got to the point where I literally said to my family, like, look, should it be a situation where I die in an unfortunate way, in a plane crash or something, these are the only journalists you should speak to. And, you know, do not speak to people from these outlets because I don't trust them to get anything right. It'll be spun, you know. I just don't have any faith in them. So, yeah, like, I think at the heart of it, we got to all acknowledge, though, that, like, this grubby behavior and, you know, in some cases illegal behavior that was going on, we're all to blame as journalists for sort of how we got to where we are now, to this situation of, you know, where we are not trusted. And, you know, these various approaches, whether it be like, you know, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story, or, you know, even as the Pope says, clickbait headlines is another one, you know, the fact that this winning at all costs, you know, these are all things that, you know, were just reality. And, you know, so I guess, look, if I had the magic wand, you know, I would also go back 25 years and start talking about these sort of things then. So I think that's what's, I think it's so great that we're here today, and that this course, I think, is super, super exciting.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd love that list of journalists you trust as well. Shalina.
Yeah, Jason, you've added something to my list of things I have to worry about in my will. I should cover it. So I'm thinking about some of the points that were raised around the role of the public in the ecosystem, particularly in the way that news is shared at the moment and the resilience we need to build. So my magic wand is going to be to create the social norm that you cannot be anonymous when you're sharing news. So we are going to slowly, through the peer pressure and the power of normalization, make sure you have to have your name and your history to it, and you also have to reference your sources for the news that you are sharing.
Amazing, provocative, and interesting. I mean, I would love to see what that would do to the trolling out there if that changed. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. Thank you, our wonderful panelists. Thank you for making it today. Appreciate such good commentary. There's a bunch more questions in here. Unfortunately, we can't get to them now, but if any of you want to take them in the chat, we would appreciate that. Right now, I'm very delighted to welcome in Dr. Ruth Stoker, who is the Strategic Teaching and Learning Director at the University of Huddersfield. Ruth has an incredible depth and breadth of knowledge around journalism, and she has been such a wonderful partner to Impress on this program. Welcome, Ruth.
Thank you, Gia, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. I've been asked to talk about my research and how it led to the development of a new training programme for those working in journalism and content creation. So I come to you as a former journalist working for a long time now in journalism education. And over the years, I've become particularly interested in how journalists learn in the workplace, what we call work-based learning. During the Leveson inquiry into the culture, practices and ethics of the press, I was struck by a few things. Firstly, why was the press again the subject of a national inquiry over its conduct? I'd trained as a journalist around the time of the Calcutt Commission, which looked at press conduct and privacy, and this led to the formation of the Press Complaints Commission. But now, arriving at Leveson, it felt that the sector, we hadn't moved on at all by this time. I'd been teaching for a while, and it occurred to me that the inquiry focused on the ethical conduct of journalists, but it didn't ask how journalists actually learn ethical conduct in the first place, or what the sector was doing to give journalists a good grounding in ethical practice and confidence in ethical decision making. That question became the focus of my research, and what I discovered was surprising. There is very little formal training for journalists in occupational ethics in the workplace in the UK. I interviewed early career journalists working for local and regional titles, and they were all aware of a code of practice in place at that time and had received some training around it. But learning a code is very different from understanding the wider discipline of journalism ethics. Codes of practice, of course, are important. They offer guidance on what to do in certain situations. But memorising a code can be restrictive, giving us too narrow a view. Codes often point to what you can't do, setting boundaries, but this approach doesn't really help us understand what great journalism might look like and what we should be striving for. Sometimes codes are even used to justify poor behaviour. Well, the code doesn't say we can't do this, so off we go. So my research found a significant gap in formal ethics training and a community of journalists who struggled to set out what journalism ethics was. They lacked confidence in explaining what ethical journalism should look like. There was no doubt that they'd worked hard to take an ethical approach to their work, and they looked to their colleagues for guidance on tricky ethical stories. They trusted senior colleagues who understood their readers and knew what was needed. They were also heavily influenced by the people they were writing for, feeling a responsibility to do a good job for their benefit. Journalism with a real community focus. Their readers were very powerful in helping early career journalists understand boundaries, what was acceptable, and also what good practice should be. For example, the father of a former soldier who committed suicide after struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder approached his local paper, unhappy at how the report of the inquest hadn't given a fair picture of his son and hadn't really touched the lack of mental health support which his son had desperately needed. The paper really took on board what the father was saying and worked with him to give a fuller picture of the life and character of his son, and began to campaign for improved mental health support in that town. The young journalist I'd spoken to said that the conversation with the father had really brought home to him the impact of the son's death, but also what his paper could do to make things better. He didn't talk about this, though, as an example of ethics. This came up when we were just chatting about his working week. Another journalist talked about being supportive of the town she worked in and said there were lots of opportunities to write stories which were negative about how run down the town was. But people who lived there didn't need to hear that. They knew the town had problems. What they wanted from their journalists was help in turning things around through a different kind of reporting, which was more positive and helpful in driving change. There were lots of examples like this. I found clear evidence of ethical practice, but journalists didn't frame these moments as being ethical or learning about ethics. Instead, they talked about their work with their colleagues and their community as casual instances when they tackled a difficult story and gave a voice to people who needed their support. I also found they lacked a mechanism for capturing difficult ethical decisions so that they could become a foundation for future work or could be shared within their organisation as examples of good practice. I listened to a lot of missed opportunities to consolidate a good understanding of what ethics is, and my study participants were pretty much representative of the sector. So, why does this matter? If we want to regain the trust of our audience, it's vital that every journalist and content creator understands what ethical practice is and how it applies to them. They need to be confident in their own work and be able to explain to others why their work is ethical and trustworthy. The lessons they learn through their daily work need to be recognised and captured and passed on, so that not only at an individual level is ethics better understood, but it becomes part of the working language and environment. This confidence should empower them to call out bad practice and celebrate good practice. When individuals understand what ethical journalism is, we can work together to shift industry culture into a better, more secure place and hopefully avoid another public inquiry. One young journalist who'd been working in his newsroom for about a year talked about the Manchester Arena bombing, where 23 people died and more than 1,000 were injured at an Ariana Grande concert in 2017. As a team, his newsroom talked about how to break the news to their readers, where some families had been bereaved and young people had lost friends. Discussions about the timing of online updates, headlines, pictures, the distress being caused by national media and how to avoid this, about putting their community first and having a care about what they put out. But again, this wasn't framed as a discussion with ethics at its centre, and no one captured the good practice which emerged in that newsroom that day. This felt like a lost opportunity to consolidate as a team what their newsroom culture is, to understand what ethics means to them and their organisation so that they can pass it on to others. After a conference in London in 2021, where I spoke about my research, Impress approached me to explore ways of working together. Our goal: to develop training that helps journalists and content creators to understand ethics, to think ethically about their work, and develop an ethical working culture, irrespective of their context or platform. We were fortunate to secure funding from Innovate UK to realise our ideas through a knowledge transfer partnership and bring on board Dr. Beth Parks as our associate. Together, we've created a training programme in ethical journalism which we hope people will find useful in developing a sound understanding of good ethical practice, which they can build on throughout their careers. Beth is responsible for managing the development of the training programme, which she'll be demonstrating to you all shortly. And I know that she joins me in thanking colleagues from across the sector who've given their time and support to this project. I certainly add my thanks to the team at Impress and my colleagues at the University of Huddersfield, in particular Dr. Kirsty Stiles and our Director of Distance Learning, Sean Pryor, and his team for their commitment and excellent work in reaching this point. In closing, I believe that ethical journalism is not just about codes, it's about culture, community and confidence. And by investing in meaningful training, we can all work towards creating an environment where good journalism is celebrated and trusted. Thank you. So I'll now hand you over to Dr. Beth Parks, the Education and Development Manager at Impress. She began her career in academia, having completed a PhD in history on beauty, race and media ethics in 20th century Britain. Beth spent the last 2 years at Impress developing training for journalists, content creators and strategic managers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth, and it's great to see everybody here today. So how does one go about teaching ethics? Ethics is one of those topics that feels instinctive. It's something many of us claim we just know. We feel it in our gut when a decision crosses the line. But here's the challenge. How do you take something that feels so personal and distill it into a format that enables others to practice it as a tool? How do you make ethics teachable, shareable, and actionable? For example, what if you are faced with writing a news story and need to interview a victim or survivor of sexual assault with no training? Or what if you start a new role, enter a new community, and aren't sure how to build connections with communities ethically? 2 years ago, when I started this project at Impress, understanding how ethics should be taught were questions we needed answers to. And we decided to go old school. We hit the road. So we conducted roadshows across the UK, sitting down with journalists, academics, and members of our community. We hosted workshops, conducted one-to-one interviews, and created questionnaires. To those of you attending today who participated in those sessions, who shared your experiences and your dilemmas, thank you. You told us what we needed, what was missing, and what would actually make a difference in your practice. By the end of that research journey, we had something invaluable, a clear understanding of what journalists truly wanted from ethics training. But knowing what people want is only half the battle. The next step was actually creating it. We discovered that the best way to practice your ethical skills was to discuss them with others. That's how we sharpen our thinking and how we challenge our assumptions. And that's what we wanted to deliver through this programme. So in building the programme, we've had some amazing contributions from journalists and industry professionals, from academics and researchers, and from charities, including the Samaritans, Mind, Sense, and LevelUp, and from organisations such as the New York Times, the BBC, and the Poynter Institute. We brought together these experts from across every theme and topic because their perspectives, knowledge, and real-world experiences and case studies are based on years of wide-ranging experience and from a huge pool of knowledge. And now here we are, today, on World Ethics Day, and we're launching Creating Ethical Media and Journalism. So let me highlight a few features that make this course unique. At the heart of this course is an ethical framework that you'll continuously engage with throughout each module. This isn't about memorising rules, it's about developing your practice through self-reflection. You'll build a framework that you can return to time and time again to inform your decisions in the field. Once completed, it will be an evergreen tool for all kinds of ethical situations. So no matter where you work or who you work for, you'll have a tool to allow you to easily make decisions with integrity. This makes you part of the solution to increase trust in journalism and reduce misinformation by protecting the public from manipulation. Also, this is one of the only courses on ethics in the marketplace that carries official accreditation. You'll receive Impress recognition as an ethical practitioner, and the course is CPD certified. This makes you more attractive to your audiences and employers as an accredited, trustworthy, ethical journalist. For society, it means increased public access to pluralistic, independent, and public interest news. The course consists of 9 modules delivered on Coursera, featuring a wide range of videos and podcasts. It's completely asynchronous, so you can work through it at your own pace. The course also facilitates community building to encourage engagement with peers and develop networks among like-minded professionals. This creates an increased sense of culture around best practice for journalists and a collective social promotion of narratives framing solutions to social, economic, and political issues. However, we didn't just create this course and send it out into the world. We wanted to make sure it actually works, so we tested it for you. Thanks to Microsoft, we were able to run a pilot with 30 of our members. We kicked off with an in-person workshop in July, a full day of group exercises, expert panels, and discussions about real-life ethical dilemmas that journalists face every day, alongside the evolving challenges of AI in journalism. One example of the impact of this course, encouraging better community reporting, came from a discussion on this day. One of the journalists faced an ethical dilemma about whether to publish a photo of a brand new coroner's courtroom sitting unused, while families faced the longest inquest delays in the country. The local MP took the photo of the empty courtroom, but the coroner had told the MP that publishing such a photo was illegal. Upon discussing this at our workshop and thinking through the ethics of this process, the journalist published the photo and has since had more people in the community come forward about the problems they've faced. This illustrates the importance of peer discussion around ethical practice. So, following just a single day of debating and practicing responses to ethical dilemmas, proficiency and confidence in journalism ethics increased by 27%. In that same day, 85% of pilot participants said they were more likely to use AI in their work, with over 50% expressing a desire to learn more. The wider feedback we've received has been positive, and everything we've learned from this pilot will help us continue to improve the course for future cohorts. This has been a journey from those first roadshows to today's launch. We know ethical practice is a community endeavour. This programme was built by the community, tested with the community, and it's for the community, and for the benefit of all of us going forwards. It's now on all of us to go out, learn, practice, and champion it beyond the audience here today to ensure that ethical practice makes a clear and true impact on fighting misinformation and polarisation and giving trust where it's due. I'll now hand back over to Lexi, who will give you all some next steps on how you can help us continue this journey.
Thank you so much, Beth.
Okay, sorry.
Really appreciate those comments. And I mean, we've heard some really powerful examples across the day about how media, journalism, communications are being tested across industries because of information disruption and low trust. And I've loved comments like information integrity is the mother of all matters and our responsibility. And that was resonant across the room, across your comments in the chat today, were that we need to educate people to know the truth and they see it and read it and hear it. But to do that, we need to have our ethical foundations right first. And I really hope that we've begun to imagine what a healthier, more resilient information ecosystem could look like, one built on knowledge when we're resourced and have the right skills to impart that on our communities. So the conversation doesn't end here. You may know Impress as the only press regulator recognised by Charter, which means we're independently audited to meet the highest standards of effectiveness. We're independent of government, we're independent of the industry, but our work, as I hope we've shown today, goes beyond complaints about the press. We're also focused on raising standards by providing people with the skills they need to go out and produce information with integrity. So while today marks the launch of the Impress Education Program, it's more than a milestone for the organisation. It's a call to action. Whether or not you're a journalist, editor, creator, communicator, or community or business leader, we want you to be part of our movement to put ethics and evidence at the heart of news, media, and information. So now training enrolment is open, and as a thank you for attending, we're offering exclusive discounts to webinar attendees. If you're thinking about accredited training for your business, your audience, your community, please get in touch with us via our website contact form if that sounds like you. And all the resources from today's session are going to be made available, including the session recording, accreditation details, and ethical reporting guides for immediate download. So check out your inboxes. We will be sending some follow-ups for you. I want to say thank you to all of our speakers and to everyone who signed up today. It's been a great energizing hour full of insight and challenge and possibility. Thank you, Adeline Hulan, Ali-Abbas, Jason Cumming, Shalina Young Mohammed, Dr. Ruth Stoker, and my fantastic team at Impress who have got us here today. Rebuilding trust is a long road, but it begins with moments like these on auspicious days like this one. And there have been so many hands in making that possible, including our partners and contributors who are up on the screen, particularly the University of Huddersfield, Ruth, Kirsty, Sean, and the distance learning team, along with Innovate UK for their partnership. We have been overwhelmed by your generosity and support and creativity of everyone that I wish I could name up on the screen now, but I know we've gone past the hour. So finally, on behalf of Impress, I want to thank you all so much for being part of the session today. And I really look forward to keeping the conversation going with you and you being able to keep the conversation up with each other. I saw some wonderful connections being made in the chat, and long may that continue. Have a great afternoon, everyone.